Good evening, everyone. We're all ready to kick off our meeting. Sorry for starting a little bit late tonight. This is Simone Tarver. First agenda item, we'll start with our roll call. So Mary Fossey.
Present.
Chris Garay.
Here.
Jim Lingus.
Here.
Ethel McNeil.
Here.
John Monroe.
Here.
Kari Kwas.
Here.
Simone Tarver. Here. Ben Young.
Present.
Julius Wilson. You might have to unmute yourself, Julius.
Here.
Perfect.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you now. So our next item will be to approve our minutes. So Nicole sent those over to us. I moved to approve them as they are in our packet.
Hey, this is John. Could you make one minor change to it? Could you put a period after my name?
On the roll call or the
On the roll call, because the way that it reads Benjamin Young, Ethel McNeil, and John Monroe not in attendance.
Okay, yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we'll have that change made and then we'll have them for the next packet to approve.
You can approve them pending that I make that change.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's just a period. I think we can probably do that. So I moved to approve the minutes pending that change that Nicole's going to make.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? I think that one we'll just go with it because we're in agreement on that. Our next item we have on is staff comments. I'm going to do some comments first. I wanted to just, as we're moving into this important phase in our process, I just wanted to kind of clarify our roles again. We haven't talked about that much lately. And so we have our wonderful staff from the city helping to provide us with support, keep our meetings running on time, help with preparation and distribution of meeting materials. We're so appreciative to have all of that great support. On the legal side of things, we have them helping us make sure we're following the charter, following any applicable RCWs, and just generally helping us to not get sued. And then we have our districting master, and he's meant to be our expert on the map making process and the districting map development process. And then when it comes to us commissioners, we're really here to be the experts on and the advocates for our community. We're here to use our experiences as Everett residents from all across the city to represent our neighbors and to use our knowledge to form an equitable and representative districting map. And so I think especially as we move forward, it's just great to remember what we're all here for and kind of what our respective roles are. And if anyone has any questions on any of this, feel free to reach out to me or to Nicole, and we can go from there. I'll turn it over to Nicole, or unless Chris, do you have any comments?
I do have a suggestion. I'm going to hold that until the end if we have time. If not, I'll discuss that offline with you.
Perfect. I'll try and make sure that at the end we do have time to go over any discussion items just in case anyone else has anything as well.
So my only comment today is hopefully everyone received my email kind of late this afternoon and had time to read through slides 10 through 14, just because that was kind of an accumulation of the information that you as commissioners had provided Tony on the maps from our previous meeting. And then I also wanted to propose a June 22nd meeting for the group. And so we can bring that back at the end. Just wanted to put that out there. So with no further ado, Tony, are we ready with our presentation today? So we're going to try to do the presentation in 15 or 20 minutes to leave time to get through the questions at the end. If we don't get through all of the questions, we will be able to finish those on the 22nd. But the more questions we get through today, the more we will have the ability to narrow down our map for our next meeting. So with that, no further ado.
Yes, good evening, and I hope everyone is doing well under the circumstances. I've got a presentation as before, and it's divided really into three different sections. And the first group of slides depict the development process that we've used in selecting the core areas and the defined districting criteria. And so I'm going to explain that. And then I'm going to go into the second group, which shows you the new alternative plans that address the comments or concerns that you have and submitted. And the third and last provides you somewhat of a list of questions that if we ask or answer these questions, then we'll be able to select a particular plan or group of plans. And so I want to first go into the development process. And remember me talking about going from general to more specific in detail. This just gives you an example. In the beginning, we had the entire city we could choose to develop districts in. And so we had anywhere to actually start, anywhere to draw the districts. However, what we did was we selected our district cores. And so once we selected our district cores, that eliminated some of the territory or the areas that we could actually select or expand into. And so the white areas, if you see on the screen, are really the only areas that the districts could expand to. So we went to that large area of the entire city and to now
see whatever you're looking at.
Oh, you all can't see?
I see it.
I can see
I'm
it.
not able to.
I can see it.
I can't see it. Let's see.
I'm also, while we're on a pause, I'm also getting some feedback. So if you're not muted, please do so because it's echoing a bit. And then Tony, can you slide your the image, the small image of your
Just right here.
presentation off to the side because it's even for perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Can the commissioner see the slide?
Yes.
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
I still cannot. Is there?
It may be one of your windows that's been minimized.
We spent quite a bit of time on this number one. I suspect that the majority of the committee members are pretty familiar with the work that we did and what that process included.
Okay, so I'll continue, and if you, Commissioner, if you have any questions, just feel free to contact Ms. Tarver, and we can make sure that you actually have those questions answered. And so, in essence, what we did is we really limited the areas that or where we could expand to. But when you include the criteria, specifically whole precincts, communities of interest, neighborhoods really, and then avoiding minority cracking, we actually limited it even further. So in reality, what we did when we selected our district cores is we limited it to this area where it's translucent to really about 30% only left. It's only 37,522 people, and then only 34 precincts. And so what that did was that forced us now to only exchange areas within that white translucent area. And so that's why when we developed those initial plans, they were very similar. And they're very similar because there are only but so many ways you can actually cut up that turf, if you will. And so then the next thing we did was, of course, a couple of weeks ago, we asked or requested comments on the initial plans, and you all submitted your plans. And what I did was I synthesized and went through those plans and pulled out sort of the major, summaries and essence of those comments and concerns. And really, centered around really not splitting the neighborhoods, possibly keeping the downtown area in the same districts, keeping the the population deviations low, and then Westmont and Holly intact. And then also not splitting really neighborhoods three ways, which makes sense. And so the plans, the alternative plans, kept those in mind, those concerns and comments in mind. And so, in essence, here are the alternative plans. There are four alternative plans, and let me just say that there's not one plan that can actually accommodate all of the concerns and comments. So we cannot answer all of those concerns in one particular plan. So we have to prioritize, we have to come up with what we really want, and there are questions at the end that hopefully will do that. But just to somewhat encapsulate the plans, the A4 is similar to A2, but it splits Riverside less. And I'll go into a little more specific or larger map showing in the next group of slides, just to give you a summary. A5 wholly contains Riverside in District 1, and downtown is wholly contained in District 2. A6 splits Forest Park, splits Riverside approximately half, and Gardner whole in District 2. And A6 is a plan intentionally to lower the population deviation of all of the districts, because that was a concern listed several times in the comments. And then B2 follows a little bit of B1. I know we struck B1 down, but this created a district that kind of expanded a little on the B1 concept, but it made it much more compact, if you will, made the districts more compact and give an alternative and answer and address some of the questions that you all actually had. And so A4, what I've done is I've put sort of those summary comments or concepts in the bulletized list and put whether it's a yes or a no, and then sometimes I put yes excluding a small particular area, or yes excluding maybe District 5 or 4. And so you can see the plans, and hopefully I'm going to quickly go through this. Hopefully you've had a time to look at it, but feel free at the end to ask any questions on this. And so, for example, Bayside was kept whole on this, and so intentionally it was kept whole, except for that small piece. If you can see my cursor, remember there's that small precinct, or rather that precinct, that splits Bayside and Port Gardner. And so we either place that entire precinct in District 1, or we actually don't and leave that little piece hanging there. Does it keep the downtown area? No. I skipped Riverside. The Riverside is not kept whole. It has to be split. If Bayside is in this configuration, Riverside has to be split. And that's one of the decisions that we have to make. Does it keep the downtown area within the same district? No, the downtown area actually comes down here. South Fork is kept whole, except again for that little small piece. There's a precinct right there that actually overlaps View Ridge, Madison, and South Park. We don't split the neighborhoods. Westmont and Holly's kept, except for that small area right here. The reduction in deviations, yes for 5, but no for 4. I personally think that minus 2% is a decent population equality percentage. And then reduction overall. This is a catch-all, and so no, you haven't reduced it overall. You still have 4.07 here, 4.16 there. On 5, in this particular case, Bayside is kept in District 2, but it's not wholly contained. Riverside is wholly contained. So once again, a decision has to be made. Or do we want to actually keep Riverside whole? Do we want to keep Bayside whole? Do we want to keep the most of Riverside or most of Bayside? So that's one of the first two questions that we we really have to address and answer. But if you see that Riverside now, if we try to keep that whole because of this precinct right here, you get that irregular shape. So it still meanders, if you will. Downtown area, yes, there may be a portion right here where it's a no, but right now that downtown area stays in that District 2. Forest, yes, again, except that small area. Port Gardner is not kept whole, doesn't split three precincts. Westmont is the same way. Now, Westmont, in this particular case on A5, because of the population deviation, there was a precinct added here, precinct 40, that equalized the population and reduced it down. That's debatable. Initially, I looked at that. I thought it belonged more in 5 versus 4. I did this solely for population deviation purposes, and we can easily move that back. Excuse me, the deviation again is reduced, and the overall deviation is reduced except for District 3. On A6, Bayside is whole, but we still have now Riverside somewhat split in half, if you will, in this stair-step configuration. Port Gardner is now whole. The downtown area is split now because it's in Bayside and Port Gardner. South Forest Park is not kept whole. The reason why South Forest Park is not kept whole is because of this plan, as I said before, the desire is for it to actually have a low deviation overall. And you see that you have the minus 1.72 as the lowest and the 1.86 is the highest. Port Gardner is whole, it's not split in 3. Westmont, again, and Holly are intact except for that small piece. We added that piece there to keep the population deviation down. And the overall population deviation is down. Finally, we have the B2, which is that sort of modification of D1. We struck that down, but tried to actually create a plan and address some of the questions. Continue to extend down here, District 3, into the Port Gardner area, but keeping wholly intact all of these other areas. Riverside now has, once again, if we do Bayside whole, we got to chop up Riverside in some configuration. But instead of splitting Forest, we now split Evergreen. So there is a difference in essence of splitting, instead of splitting Forest as we did in that previous plan, it actually splits Evergreen down here, and 5 is added to that. Once again, we have the Westmont Holly, which has that additional precinct that keeps the deviation down further. And so finally now, that's a quick sort of and dirty explanation of each of those plans. But here are some of the questions that we really need to begin to answer. And so if we answer these questions, then we can actually begin to select a particular plan configuration. And then that doesn't mean we won't move down to the next level of detail, but we can then pick a plan or two that we can begin to modify from that and move down a different level. That being said, I did want to give you an example. I wanted to talk to you of why and how you all now are going to apply more input than I am. And we're at the point that your knowledge of the locality is going to be critically important. And I wanted to give you 2 examples of what I mean. Now, I worked on a plan for the state of Alabama. The state legislature there developed a racially gerrymandered districts. The plaintiffs of the court case turned to me and asked me could I develop sort of a remedial plan that resolved the racially gerrymandered districts. So I did so. And in doing so, I was drawing a district inside Birmingham, Alabama, and I thought it was compacted, met all the traditional redistricting criteria. And the person I'm working with said, I can't do this. I said, I couldn't do what? He said, put these 2 areas in the same district. And I asked why. And he said, these neighborhoods, these areas dislike each other. And they dislike each other, excuse me, they dislike each other such that they probably would not let this plan go through. Well, my point is that's something I would never. And now I'm not saying that there are neighborhoods that hate each other, but I'm saying that that's the input that needs to be, brought out with you all. I would never know that. I'll give you another example. I was working on a plan in California congressional district, and an airport was in one of the districts for the last couple of redistricting cycles. And it was thought at one time, let's remove that airport and put it in another district. And that was stopped. Someone said, no, you can't do that. And I said, why? They said, well, the people who work in that area, the bulk of those individuals live in that district. And in essence, they were saying they formed some sort of community of interest and had an interest in keeping that airport in that district. Once again, that's not something that I would actually be able to know. These are things that you all, now we've reached a certain point, bring to the table to finalize these plans where I sit back a little more and now bring to the table basically just keeping you on track with traditional redistricting criteria and making sure that it's legal. And so with that, I don't know how we want to handle the questions. Simone, would you like to go through each of the questions, or Ms. Weber, would you like to go through the questions, or would you like
I'll
me?
go through the questions, and then I think what makes the most sense would probably be just to go through our list, and if folks have thoughts they want to share, just being mindful of time since we do have quite a few questions to go through. I think that might be the best way to go through it. And if you, by some chance, don't have a preference, that's fine too. Just let us know when I get to your name on the list. So we can start with question 1. Do we include most of Bayside in District 1 or District 2? So I'll just go down the list. Mary Fossey?
I'm going to move back to a plan so we can see.
Simone,
Okay.
I think we should ask 1 and 2 together, and just have a bit of a conversation around questions 1 and 2.
Okay.
Those 2 can belong in one bucket, I think.
I think that makes sense.
Great.
So we'll do, pull that back up. So do we include most of Bayside in District 1 or 2? And do we include most of Riverside in District 1 or 2?
Okay. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
I was a little confused on the plans because I thought that we had discussed the precincts 18, and that's the south side of Bayside, being separate from the north end because that's where the Everett High School was, and there were a lot of, I guess, houses around there that fit more with the north district than it did with more of the downtown area. And we had talked about keeping precinct 18 for the more south district, and then including more of Riverside. And I don't see an option there that has that.
Right. I definitely recall that. I don't recall it being in the comments. And so when I looked at that, I only addressed the concerns that were in the comment, but I definitely recall mentioning that the last time. And we can come up with an option of that, but I didn't recall it being part of the comments.
It wasn't.
Okay. So, but we can definitely address that if it's desired to do that. I mean, that's.
And I don't recall, Mary, was that vote? That was part of a discussion, but I didn't remember Tony or I being directed to do that. That was part of like a broader conversation. Can you elaborate a little bit on what your expectations were out of that conversation?
I thought we were going to.
Simone.
Okay.
I brought it up last time that we could do that, and I plumb forgot to do any kind of follow up on it afterwards. So that's my bad. But when we move forward with doing some more updates, I think that is one that we had discussed and that we did have some agreement on, that Everett 18 would fit better with a potential District 2, and Everett 17 would be a better fit for District 1.
And so just to chime in, this means that we're fine with splitting Bayside, and that's sort of the essence of, I think, what can address that. And
Yeah.
if everyone's fine, then we can definitely look at that.
We can keep going down the line for people's comments. Mary, did you have more?
Only to the degree of what Tony was talking about earlier, which I think I had already expressed, that there was a feeling of difference between the east side and the west side, but I got voted down on that. So.
Alrighty. Let's move on to, oh, thank you, Mary. Chris?
So as I said at the beginning, I think I'm going to need some time to sort of digest and think through these questions since I'm coming in a little cold on this meeting. Let me ask this. I like the approach that you've taken, Tony, with kind of listing out all of the concepts with yeses and nos. Do these, I guess in my mind, when I'm looking through all those questions, it comes down to a series of trade-offs. So is this section of questions that you've proposed, is this essentially kind of a distillation of all of those things? Like, these are the trade-offs, or are these things mutually exclusive, or do they kind of represent, like, if we were to decide most of these things, that drives us toward a specific map?
Right, they're not mutually exclusive, so there's overlap there. And so if we answered or tried to address all of them, it wouldn't work. We cannot address all of them. And so the reason for the questions really is to kind of compel us to decide on a particular configuration or configurations. And so, for example, as I said, if we are going to keep Bayside whole, then we can't keep Riverside whole. And vice versa. If we're going to keep Riverside whole, we can't keep Bayside whole. So the two really can't be contained inside the same plan. So that's just an example of one of those mutually exclusive. There's an overlap, not mutually exclusive, if you will.
Gotcha. So I guess from what I know and what I've heard, it's relatively important to keep downtown intact. So it sounds like to me that initially and I'd like to put some more thought into it, but I think that might be a more important concept than keeping Bayside whole, just at first blush. But I'll reserve the right to think some more on that.
Thank you, Chris. Jim?
Jim, you'll have to press *6 to unmute yourself. Jim, this is Nicole. If you can hear me, press *6 to unmute yourself. Okay, come back to him, Simone.
Okay. Ethel?
Ethel, you're muted as well. Oh, Jim's unmuted. Great. All right, Jim, go ahead.
Okay, I believe we need to keep Riverside intact. And if we look at Plan A5, maybe that's a place that I can best reference. First of all, I think we need to, you can see Bayside there's a little bit in District 1. That boundary line at Bayside needs to move south, maybe to 23rd, maybe to 25th. But if we're going to keep Riverside intact, Bayside is going to need to move down to 23rd or 25th. I would ask Kari about her perspective on that. That meandering line that goes up to Delta, that should come out. I believe Port Gardner, the boundary should be straight across below Riverside. That line should be straight across. Why it meanders up into by Delta doesn't work. So I would say let's keep Riverside intact. Let's move that Port Gardner boundary west to east directly so that it takes in all of Port Gardner, and then let's adjust Bayside south to 23rd or 25th and see how that all works out in terms of the deviation percentage of population. But I believe Riverside should be intact.
Can you give us a little bit of why you think Riverside should stay intact, Jim? I'd love your perspective on that.
Well, first of all, there's more commonality. It gives East Everett a larger population and voice, as far as I'm concerned. And and that's important. I believe that they have a larger population for different reasons. But plus it just makes sense, Nicole, that there's more commonality than there probably is when you take Bayside and bifurcate it somewhere around 23rd and 25th, because some relates to downtown and some might relate north. Others might have a different perspective on it, but that's my response.
Thank you very much.
But I do believe that Port Gardner line is haywire, and it should extend west-east straight and eliminate that island that we've been looking at for a while, that goes down to in most of the different plans, that island that goes down to that was in District 1. It just seemed like an island that didn't belong in District 1, and by going west to east on Port Gardner, it eliminates that as well. It's cleaner. It makes it more compact, cleans it up.
Thank you very much.
I thought this is a good time to show an example of one, the Maptitude program, but also example of the constraints that we have. If everyone can see this, I'm looking at a map now. This is Plan A5. And the blue lines, the light blue lines, that represents the precincts. So we cannot break precincts. We've established that as a districting criteria. So any of these lines that may not go straight over are due to the precincts being irregularly shaped. So we're forced or compelled into that. That's number one. Number two, just to show you an example, I mentioned it, but I didn't really highlight it. This is the reason why that territory in the beginning has a little larger area for Delta, a little larger area for Everett, because there's an overlap between the neighborhoods and the precincts. So we either chop off Delta and chop off Northwest Everett, or we add that precinct in there. It's best if this is a core area to go ahead and add that precinct, because it becomes a whole precinct included. To address this is that little irregular shaped precinct right here. Now, just to keep that in mind, I'm going to show you something. One of the things that we could do is we could remove this precinct from 1. If we do, this becomes -10 and +12. So we now have to take away from District 2. That may not be bad, because as one of the other commissioners wanted to do, is they wanted to have this sort of, stair step, not want to, but thought that would be a better configuration because of east and west and north and south being better in the district. So we could have this configuration. And so Riverside isn't wholly contained, but it's only a small piece right there that's inside. If we want Riverside to be wholly contained, we're going to have to select this entire precinct and have that irregular shape. But if we want Riverside included, and we don't care about splitting Bayside, we could have this configuration of District 1, and we could lock it in. And so I just thought I'd give you an example of what we can do. Let me go
Thank
back.
you, Tony. I think that kind of clears up a lot of it. It seems like where we're at right now, we have good amount of support for keeping Riverside whole, and that we could potentially split Bayside. No one's really wedded to keeping Bayside intact in terms of all of those three being in the same district. So now we'll move on to Ethel McNeil.
Go ahead, Ethel, if you're ready. All right, Simone, move on. We'll come back to Ethel. We can't hear Ethel. We can't hear you right now. We're going to come back to you next.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm looking at that, and Riverside is such a large area. I would hate to see it split off, in any way. I'd like to see it kept intact myself. When I look at this map, when I look at A5, it's, I prefer to see it like that. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. And then what are your thoughts on Bayside? Are you feeling like we should include it in District 1 or 2, or if you're okay with it being split?
To me, there's such a tiny, tiny portion of Bayside that would be over in District 1. I don't see where it would, cause a lot of heart. First of all, for that little area that's sitting over there, I don't see a big heartbreak there. I could be wrong. I don't live over there, so, the people living there might see it differently. But I think Riverside is such a large area, I'd like to see it stay together.
And I think there was some discussion looking at the map of having that line move down a little bit, so that Bayside would almost be more like split in half.
I think that would be a heartache for that group of people living there, because I think sometimes you get more confusion when you do that, because you could be across the street. Well, like where I live, across the street from me is Mukilteo School District, but on my side of the street is Everett School District. And I think sometimes it could be just very confusing and won't work well.
Okay. Alrighty, well, thank you for your good feedback. John?
Yeah, I like, always interesting to get everybody's viewpoints. I like the idea of keeping Bayside in District 1 and keeping it as whole as possible. I also don't have a problem with splitting up Riverside between 1 and 2. And the reason why is because if you look at the view that Tony showed us that had the precincts on it, if you look at the far east side of Riverside, it's largely uninhabited. There's not a large population there. So even though, yes, it represents a significant, let's just call it area, it doesn't appear to have a number of streets and or residents there. So I don't have a problem with splitting Riverside.
Okay, thank you, John. Kari?
Yeah, I recall the conversation from last, I guess, week, I don't know. Last month is correct, about doing the stair step through Bayside. I don't mind Bayside being broken up, and I think that above the stair step, so including Everett High School and the housing and lots of neighborhood there, goes north to District 1. The one thing that caught my eye on the Esri map is that Tony has listed out the Norton Grand Historic District, the Rucker Grand Historic District, and Riverside Historic. And if we use the stair step in Bayside, so I think that's, what is this, District 12 north, that would include the Rucker Grand Historic District. That would all be together, so those people could be related. Also in Everett 14, Everett 15, and Everett 10, that includes the Riverside Historic District. So even with the weird sort of stair-step and Riverside to split it, because like John just said, there's not a lot of people that live far to the Riverside there. I think that we would be okay. My main thing is trying to keep the housing together in that north end. And to some extent, I see Riverside being aligned with Lowell and with that east part of Port Gardner. So I think that they might be better represented, if you will, by being split between District 1 and 2.
Thank you. That's really, really good feedback. Now it's me. I'm okay with Bayside being split. If it's just 18 going into District 2, looking at this A4 plan, I also would be okay with all of Bayside staying together. I think I'm fine with either way. And as for Riverside, I think what John said makes a lot of sense. If we do decide to split Riverside, that it wouldn't be the worst thing if Everett 17 was part of District 2. So honestly, I could go either way. And I'm waiting for someone to transition, and that person would be me. So now we can go on to Ben.
Me myself, I like A4 and B2. I don't have any real comments or heartburn about it. Either way, I know that my tendency is to want to see my tendency, even though it's not in this plan, would be to see Bayside broken up as opposed to Riverside broken. I mean, Bayside take more out of it, and then shift the weight correspondingly to, in some form or fashion, to District 3. I know that would mean that you'd have to adjust District 1, District 2, and District 3 in order for that to happen, but that would be because there is such a deviation there. That I'm looking at B4 saying that. But if we turn and look at, I mean, not B4, A4.
B2,
I'm
A4.
looking at B4 would be fine with me also. I couldn't remember. I'm mixing my numbers up now. I keep
You
saying
mean
one thing.
you'd be fine with A4,
A4
and you're looking at
and
B2.
Right.
Yeah.
So both of those plans work for me. And for that matter, I'm saying that if we adjusted a little bit, we would adjust a little bit.
All right, thank you, Ben. Julius, any thoughts on keeping Bayside in District 1 or 2, or including Riverside in District 1 or 2?
I like Kari. Am I pronouncing your name right?
Yes.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you. I like her argument and how she explained how Lowe's could be a part of once you split Riverside, how Lowe's could be a part of the same district, and I like that how she explained also historic districts, the different communities. So I'm gonna go with her approach. She spoke the words for me, I guess. Thank you.
Perfect. So
Happy
it's
to help.
sounding like, for the most part, I feel like we're on basically the same page. That for District 1 and 2, we would be okay with Bayside being split, potentially, and keeping Riverside together. But if we do choose to split Bayside, we're looking at Everett 17 as being kind of that swing space. So I think for those two top areas, it would be great to see another version of the map potentially where Everett 18 is in 2 and Everett 17 is in 1, and then potentially one where Everett 18 is in 1 and Everett 17 is in 2. I think those were the main kind of two options most people were discussing. Was there anything else anyone was interested in seeing just in regards to those two districts?
This is Kari, Simone. On Everett 18, to echo what Ben said, I would even say that Everett 18, so part of Bayside, could swing to District 3, which would be on the west side.
Yeah. I don't think we have one that looks that way yet, but I think we could see an iteration where 18 is the top of a third option. Is that something that you think would be possible, Tony?
We could. That's very similar to the B1 plan.
Yeah.
And there's, I guess, good and bad, meaning that when we add that portion of Bayside to District 3, we now have to take away something. So it doesn't have to be District 5, but something has to, remove area from District 3. So that means a greater part of Evergreen, most likely, or, for example, less of Port Gardner somehow is put into District 3. Do you see what I mean? We do get into a situation that we start to make it irregularly shaped at other areas once we do that.
And my this is Kari again. I'm looking at it again, and I'm really actually thinking of Port Gardner. So I apologize. Yes, Bayside, that lower district would go 2 to shift to the right to east, but I would like to see Port Gardner, that top part of Port Gardner, move towards 3. So I like Ben had said, I kind of like B2 a little bit, the plan B2. Sorry. So yeah, my apologies. Bayside shift to 2. Yeah.
If we can avoid going back to maps we've already voted out, let's do that. So thank you.
Would you please repeat that, Kari? Would you please repeat what you just said?
So I think coming back to last month's meeting when we were trying to stair step Bayside, thinking that fit more with the north. So I agree that precinct 12 goes north. Precinct, is this 18, goes south. And that on map B2, I can see that filling in some of that gap, moving it east. And for Port Gardner, then I like B2 in that the coastal stays together, but unlike B1, the one that we eliminated, it doesn't go as far north. So more of Bayside stays with District 1 as opposed to District 3. That's a lot to say. Did that make sense, Jim?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
Okay, thank you.
Just for a clarification, this is B1 if you can see it. And we can see that it went into Bayside, maybe not as much as what people are talking about, or maybe more than what people are talking about now. But this is that configuration. If you look down by Evergreen, we have to subtract some information, or some area from District 3 if we're going to move up into Bayside. And so that's really what I was referring to.
Tony, do you have enough information for questions 1 and 2 for us to move on to question 3 and 4?
I think I switched to the wrong one. I think I do. In essence, we should show an example of that stair step configuration in Bayside.
Okay.
And then, so that's going to be one of the options. But we also have, I think we're split. Unless we want to make a decision, that's the only option that we have. But we also have the option of whether we want to keep or split rather Riverside. And so I heard two um, different configurations. If we split Riverside, then most likely Bayside is going to be remained wholly intact. Well, except for that small piece right there. And so that's something that I think we need to address and come clear if we want to actually split that staircase configuration. I can come up with a configuration, another plan, but we may end up with three plans. It depends upon what we do from these questions on. And so, but I can come up with another plan, basically that splits Riverside and keeps it whole. And so I think what I was hearing is Lowell uh, is more connected or better suited with Riverside, or rather Riverside is best suited with Lowell, one of the commissioners was talking about.
And I just want to make sure, Chris, did you want to provide comment at this time or not? Because we didn't get to hear from you.
Yeah, I spoke. I'm good.
Okay.
And I think what we're looking for is, so what we don't have is for one option of the map to have District 1 include basically look like B2, except I think that we're looking for it to also include Everett 16, and then having Everett 17 become part of a separate district, and then a version where Everett 18 goes into District 2 and Everett 17 goes to District 1. I think those were the two things we were discussing, and I think that it would be helpful for us to see those two versions. I think you did one of them on that Maptitude, and that was really great to see. I think those two would really help to help us make that decision at our next meeting with regards to what we want to do with that top area.
Okay, that sounds great. I will do that.
Thank you. And now we can do, if no one else has any comments on these first two, we can move on to the next couple. So
you want to open it up real quick for any additional comments? People can just chime in if they want to comment on one or two, and then we'll.
I have a question. I have a question. Why we have Plan B2? I thought that we eliminated the B. Did we just eliminate B1?
Right, we eliminated B1, but B2 is not B1. B2 is a correction, according to some of the comments, under the B1 configuration type, if you will. So we had issues of B1. We may have issues of B2. And so you all can decide, let's just eliminate B2. But B1 was, some of the issues that we had with B1 were addressed, and they were addressed with the comments. You all decide, you can just eliminate B2 right now.
Tony, maybe you could explain a little bit how this is an improvement on B1 specifically.
Right. If B1, I don't know if you recall, B1 actually grabbed or added precincts all the way. There's a precinct right here. You can't see it. And then there are 2 or 3 or 4 precincts right in this area. B2 extended District 2 all the way, covering this area all the way down to District 3 precincts down here. We couldn't go further than that, and we wouldn't want to, because these precincts, essentially there are 3 precincts right here that cross over Boulevard Bluff. But we went all the way across here, and we did that because B2 or B1 went all the way into Bayside, and so it had to lose some population. And so the population, if we're going to keep View Ridge, Madison intact, and Harvard View, Seacrest, Glen Haven intact, and Boulevard Bluff intact, the only area it really had to lose was the area down here. So some district had to absorb that. So we had a crazy configuration that looped down here. And so in order to address that and keep, let's say, Bayside whole, if that was a desire, then the Bayside portion was chopped off. And so Port Gardner now was the northern end of that, again, except for that small area right there. And Silver Lake came in and grabbed this area. This was added to Silver Lake versus 2 coming in and adding this area. Silver Lake added this area, which made it much more compact than the last B1 configuration.
Can I make a motion to eliminate Plan B2 and explain why?
I'd second that motion.
Okay. Thank you. The reason why I think it should be eliminated is because I think we've all kind of established that it's probably a really bad idea to split downtown along Hewitt into 2 different districts. And if we did want to include that little stair step, there's no possible way for compactness to have that district, I guess, is it 3 there? Have that little stair step and have that be compact.
Yeah, I think the other thing that really doesn't work for me in B2 is when we had this initial discussion of core areas, South Forest Park has absolutely nothing in common with Lowell. And so it really doesn't belong in the same District 2.
Does anyone else have any other comments before we vote?
That's a good point, John.
All right, if there's no other comments or questions, any comments or questions, last chance. Okay, so let's vote on this. So Mary Fossey?
Yes.
Chris Gray?
Yes.
Jim Lingus?
Yes.
Ethel McNeil?
Yes.
John Monroe?
Yes.
Kari Kloss?
Yes to eliminate.
Simone Tarver? Yes. Ben Young?
He stepped out.
Julius Wilson?
Yes.
Alrighty, so we will remove B2 as an option for all the reasons that Mary mentioned. Any more comments, questions before we start talking about South Forest Park? And just being mindful of everyone's time. We're looking at about 7:05 right now. I know we probably won't cover all of this tonight, but just so everyone's aware. So do we split South Forest Park? Do we place most or all of South Forest Park in District 2 or District 3? So we go about the same way. Tony, do you have any comments before we discuss?
The only comment I have is if we do place South Forest Park in District 3, then that means we have to eliminate a portion of Evergreen. So that's the caveat, let's say.
Alrighty. So we'll go back down the line again. Mary?
Come back to me.
Chris?
I don't have a strong opinion on that particular question one way or the other. It doesn't drive a significant decision point for me.
Jim?
Well, I heard John's comment about South Forest Park, and I had agreed that there may not be similar perspectives, but that probably happens throughout different areas and neighborhoods. With respect to District 3, it seems to me like most of the plans, including the recent ones, A4, 5, and 6, and B2, all work because they don't encroach into Pinehurst. And and that's important because A1 encroached into Pinehurst, and I believe most plans keep the neighborhoods in District 3 together. Although that said, there's also an irregular boundary of some type in South Forest Park, and if you look at it in Plan A5 and let's see, A5 and A4, you'll see that irregularity at the bottom. It's just kind of a funny shape.
It's that precinct. We have a couple precincts that cross over into two neighborhoods.
Yeah, I understand what it is, and we can talk about precincts perhaps later, but if we are going to get the population, the deviation percentage where it should be, then if we are going to include South Forest Park, we should move, rather than bifurcate it and split it like we do, which is north and south. We should just move that line up and find a place where we can split it east and west, and whether that's 52nd or 54th, but keep most of Forest Park intact and move that line up, that squiggly area up a bit, so that we can keep it as part of District 3, if it needs to be in District 3. Now, Kari made a point of talking about a couple of those precincts in Bayside that may be better in District 3. And I need to look at that because I need to understand more about that. That may be part of an overall solution. But I do like District 3 staying intact in terms of View Ridge, Evergreen, Harborview, and Boulevard Bluff. The challenge is it doesn't give you enough population. So where do we get that? And perhaps that is moving that squiggly area up a little bit into South Forest Park, west to east. I sure don't like separating South Forest Park from 41st to 54th right down the middle. That doesn't seem to work. Or maybe it includes part of what Kari was talking about, and we just need to look at that. But that's my perspective on. If I look at Plan 5, I say it looks okay, and if we move that Forest Park squiggly area up a little bit and get a little more population, District 3 looks pretty good. But we've talked about precinct 18, I believe is the number, and an area in Bayside that now enters the equation. So I've rambled a bit, but that's my perspective on District 3.
Thank you, John. That's really good feedback. And then just to clarify with everyone, we are working at the precinct level, so it will be challenging or impossible to split precincts. So that's one of the tricky things with Forest Park is that 24 and 27 are essentially all of the South Forest Park neighborhood. Well, and then there's that little part below. So that's what gets kind of tricky is that splitting precincts isn't really an option. So just something to keep in mind as we're making suggestions. And correct me if I'm wrong, Tony, if we can split precincts.
You're exactly right. And okay. They're basically, like you said, two precincts of South Forest Park. So we can split it in, to a certain extent, half here, or we can include the entire neighborhood in District 3. But as I said before, if we do that, then we have to remove some area, most likely down here at Evergreen, which would have to go into some other district.
So this is, Tony, I have a question. So
yes,
are precincts a priority and more important than getting the deviation right and avoiding irregular boundaries? And have we as a committee, Nicole, taken a vote that precincts are what is guiding us? I do appreciate that Chris asked a couple of meetings back to bring precincts into the discussion, and that's been real helpful in looking at that. But my question is, have we really concluded that we're using precincts as kind of is that the important priority in setting our boundaries? Has that decision been made?
Flora Diaz can chime in here about the rules around precincts. There's some legal stipulations for that. Flora, are you here?
I'm here. I think that it would probably be easier if I just do a brief memo around precincts that I could provide those materials to the commissioners. I think that Tony has also been working with the issue of precincts up on the closer level and the difficulty with splitting those up. Probably one way to think of it is, as far as the context of the RCW criteria that commissioners are focusing on, is to think of precinct as one of the types of boundaries that we're working around.
And let me also just chime in. It's somewhat logical to use precincts, not go below the precinct level, because next year, if you change precincts now, you're going to have to do it next year as well as they go through the 2020 round of redistricting. And so changing them back to back, it may not make sense even if you could do it.
Thank you for that clarification.
I would only add one comment, and it's not that I'm against precincts. It's just that I wasn't aware that precincts were guiding us as clearly as some folks think they are. So my question is, when we looked at the basic rules and they talked about those criteria that we need to look at, I would have thought that if precincts was one of them, that they might have called out precincts. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't use precincts, but we're getting a lot of attention on precincts here as we're making our decisions. And is that the right roadmap we should be following? Because it does create a different set of challenges for some of the districts when we go that way. That's just a comment. Thank you.
And I just want to sort of reiterate, when we split a precinct, we not only impact the local election, also the county or the state election as well. So it does have sort of an administrative cost associated and a snowball effect, and that's why even though you may be able to split a precinct, it may not be beneficial to split a precinct because it just doesn't impact the local election, affects all of the other elections as well.
And Mr. Fairfax, I'm not sure that I'm talking about splitting precincts. Maybe that is what happens. I'm talking more about our precincts really the primary criteria. And maybe when I ask the question, I need to focus more on what's happening as precincts get split, and that's what you're saying, and that doesn't bode well with respect to kind of what the future with respect to how things are determined with respect to voting and those things. I hadn't gotten that far. But anyhow, I've interrupted 3 times here, and that's it. I won't do that again. I'm sorry.
No worries at all. So we'll move on to Ethel. So we're looking at, do we split South Forest Park? Do we place most or all of South Forest Park in District 2 or in District 3? Do you have any thoughts you want to share on this?
Well, I want to look at something else before I vote on this. I have a grave concern about something that I'm seeing here that's really haunting me a little bit on a map that I saw back here a while ago. And I'm really concerned right now about what's happening. So I want to hold my thoughts off until I look at that map again. There's another map here that I'm really, really concerned about right now.
Okay. John?
Yeah, I would like to keep South Forest Park intact if at all possible. But also when I look at A6 and A6 shows it split, again, I think this is one of those that Tony talked about. Um, and Jim would probably be better to answer this and or comment this on this one than I am. But if my recollection of the homes, the residents in the east side, excuse me, the west side of South Forest Park, they are much more aligned with uh, the rest of the neighborhoods in District 3. They're much more aligned to that common core area. And so maybe having the east side in District 2 with similar common core area as Glacier View is not so bad. So I could live with it either way, but when you really get down and look at it, I think it's okay to split it.
Thank you, John. Kari?
I would align my comments with John's that I think it is fine to split it, and I agree that I think the west side of South Forest Park aligns more with View Ridge Madison and the east to Glacier View. So I am not concerned about it, and I defer to Jim because it is his neighborhood, but I'm fine with it being split.
Thank you. I would agree. I think that when it comes to that particular neighborhood, I think it would be fine to split it. I agree with the comments that have already been made. Ben, did he hop back on? No.
He's not coming back.
Oh, okay. Julius?
I would like to not split South Forest Park, but I don't live there. It's just so small. That's why I'd rather not split it. Maybe put it in District 3. But for the people that live there, they said they don't mind it being split, so I'm familiar with the area. So I'm okay with that. If they want to split it, I'm okay. If they want to keep it whole, I'm whole. Okay.
Alrighty, it sounds like for the most part we're okay with splitting it, but it did sound like some folks wanted to potentially defer to what Jim had said since he's more familiar with that neighborhood. Do we want to open this up to more discussion, or is this something that we would want to vote on? The vote would potentially be for either separating South, being okay with separating South.
Well, I don't think we need to vote on it, Simone. I think that Tony and I are collecting feedback, and it sounds like that is an area that people don't have, or that Jim's opinion is the one that we should be using in creating the additional map. But if we vote on it, then we're locked in to not splitting any part of that. And I don't know that we want to do that quite yet. Tony, do you have any comment on that?
The only comment that I would say is I'm trying to get an idea of whether you all truly want to put South Forest Park in District 3, or it doesn't matter. And if it doesn't matter, then it would most likely remain in District 2, except for that small piece. If it does matter, then I would place it in District 3. And so if we can somewhat focus on that, one of those two, if you all feel that South Forest Park belongs in District 3, then that's what I'll shoot for, and come up with a configuration that does that.
This is Jim. I'm trying to look at all the districts. I'm not focusing on where I live and this South Forest Park district. I'm approaching this with trying to do the right thing for all 5. If we are going to include some of South Forest Park in District 3, I believe that probably the east-west line, or that little cutoff area where it is today by precincts, may be the best, because there probably are more commonalities near 41st, from 47th or 52nd to 41st than there are from 52nd south to Peck's Drive. So probably if you do, it probably belongs, part of it belongs in District 3. And it probably is that small part down at the bottom. And that just means that the deviation population could end up, being smaller than it could be a less than what we're trying to achieve. But that but splitting it down the middle may not be the best solution.
Splitting it down the middle is our only option if we're going to split it at all. So I think that the overall idea is that if we do need to split it, the majority are okay with it being split. But I think that it sounds like there is a preference on Jim's side to try and keep it together. Is anyone hearing anything different than that?
No, the preference I'm saying, Simone, is if we do need to, the area that should be in Area 3 is that area that if you look at A5, that little area at the bottom, and if you want to draw that line straight across, that's somewhere, you can either, that's somewhere 52nd, 54th, but it keeps most of South Forest Park intact. And that's what I'm saying. If it does belong in District 3, some of it, that's where it should be, is that east-west line somewhere at a little bit north of where it is today. Line it off. Take out that irregularity. Keep it with precincts wherever. And if this is what the precincts show is this little irregularity, then we stay with that. But,
yeah. So Everett 33, which is that's the weird little part. Part of it is in View Ridge, Madison. Part of it is South Forest Park. That's that little irregularity. Unless something vastly different comes out in that memo that's going to follow this meeting, our options for anything that has to do with South Forest Park would be splitting it down the middle. So I think we're pretty much in agreement that if we need to split it down the middle, that we can, but let's just see what our next iterations look like, and then we can decide for sure if we want to make any changes elsewhere to keep that together if we end up having to split it. So I would say I guess it's kind of undecided.
So we're at 7:24 p.m. right now, and we could continue this meeting for another 30 minutes and get through the rest of the questions. So we could have we can move on to the next step at our next meeting, or we can move on to conversation items on the agenda, end at 7:30, and then finish this on the 22nd, which would put us at July for next steps of this process, July 6th.
I think we might be better off just ending at 7:30. I think we had several people that wanted more time to be able to review everything before we make any more final decisions. I'm okay with going until 8, but it kind of seemed like a lot of people kind of wanted more time to review the materials. Does anyone really want to keep going and finish this off tonight, or would people like a little more time to review?
Well, let's hear from people let's hear about 4 and 5. I think we should learn what people have on their mind with respect to 4 and 5. That would be helpful. But,
I think that's a good stopping point. It's my vote.
On the 22nd, we would be able to review the additional map with changes to the north end?
Yes. What I might as well do is create another map, maybe 2, I think, and they'll be probably A7 and 8, and get those to you all.
Okay, then I agree.
And Tony, do you think we'll be able to have those updated maps like later this week or early next week, so that we can have all the materials for like almost a full 2 weeks, so that everyone has plenty of time to review, and if they have any follow-up questions that they need to get figured out, we can work on that between now and then.
I think
Yeah.
the 12th is a reasonable date, Simone, and that would give the entire week of the 15th. I don't want to. I know everyone is very, very busy, including Tony, during this time, so I don't want to push too hard. If that's okay with everyone else, or the 10th.
I think he could make 2 maps. I mean, he just showed us on Maptitude making the maps. I don't think
Tony, do you want to wait? Is that okay for you?
Yeah. I can have it in a week. And so what is that?
Okay. The 8th.
The 8th. Yeah, I can have it by the 8th. That allows you at least a couple of weeks or something for that.
That's fair. Thank you.
Nicole, is there any chance of the 15th, or was 22nd a magic number?
Well, the 15th is not a problem for myself. It just gave us I was just looking at the 6th, because our next meeting would be the 6th. So if we met on the 22nd, we'd have a week off, and then the materials would all be fresh, and we could jump in on the 6th. I was just kind of thinking of it that way, but I've got no issues with the 15th. Tony, does the 15th work for you?
Oh,
I'm fine either way, just thinking of expediency if there was a concern about timeline.
I think as long as we hit a second meeting in June, we're going to be good with our timeline. So no, I don't think that's a problem. And then the 22nd also would allow everyone more time, and it's a very chaotic month, or it has been a very chaotic month for everyone, I think. So that would just give everyone a little bit more time to review and come up with opinions and suggestions and things like that.
I'm fine if you want to do the 15th. So it's totally up to you all.
I think my preference would be for the 22nd. Is there anyone who really wants the 15th?
Yeah, this is John. I'd support the 22nd.
22nd is fine. This is Kari. I'm wondering, this is Kari again, if there's the potential of just continuing on our own, writing down our answers to the questions that are left, which would be starting with, do we split Port Gardner down? And then with the addition of the maps, which we've addressed in those first 2 questions, then we could kind of see where South Forest Park lays, and then kind of work from there. Is that helpful to you, Tony, or do the rest of the commissioners, do we think that we could do that in the next week?
I think that's great if you could give me feedback on the remaining questions. Whether I can integrate them if I get them at, Friday or Saturday, they may not be able to be integrated to, hand it out Monday. So the turnover would have to be fairly quickly, I guess. But I think I do think it makes sense for you all to go through the questions while we're doing this sort of break period until the 22nd.
Would it be better to maybe say we answer those last 4 questions by the 8th, and we get that feedback to you, and then the map turnaround would then be by the 15th, so we have those new maps for a whole week, and then we can still in the next 3 weeks continue to review what we already have?
Yes, if we moved it to the 15th, I think that would be fine.
Perfect. So let's aim for answering the last 4 questions and sending that feedback to Nicole and Tony or Nicole, do you want to compile it all, or should we just send it to you and to Tony?
Just send it to me, and I'll compile it. I think it, I remove names and stuff like that, so it all goes to him very clean and, one package. So I think that's helpful.
Perfect. So let's plan for answering the last 4 questions by end of business on the 8th. So that gives us about a week to kind of think and get those answered. And then we'll aim to have that map back from Tony by about end of business on the 15th. And then that gives us all about a week to review the new maps and to take some more time to review all the great materials we have right now, and then be all prepared for the 22nd for some more great discussion.
I got a question. For those new maps, at what point do we start getting the analysis for compactness, the water removed and other stats?
You're breaking up there, Mary. Can you repeat that?
Sorry. At what point do we start looking at the compactness and the other stats associated with the different districts?
The PDF had the compactness in it, and it had the district statistics. So there was a PDF file that had maps as well as a couple of reports in there. And so they have the compactness in those. And I'll do the same for these. I usually will do the district statistics and the compactness reports and the single page PDF map.
I think the question is, like, at what point in this process do you think that those should be the factors that we're really looking at? Because right now I know we're still really focusing on our knowledge as people who are from here to try and make these districts, but getting into that kind of finer detail level, when do you think we should be doing that?
Right. You know, okay, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. If you look at those compactness scores, they're so close that it's almost indistinguishable. There's a little change here, a little change there, but they're very, very close. And so the question is if you have a compactness scores of 0.35 versus 1.33, is the 0.35 significant to actually change or warrant a change in the district? And most likely it's really not, unless there's something that is, you know, dramatic in it, you know, 0.1 versus 0.3 or 0.6 or something like that. It's not going to really play a role. And so when we have some irregularly shaped districts and they jump out at you significantly different, then they'll play a role. But right now, look at the compactness ratios, and I couldn't really tell that much of a difference. I mean, there's a 0.01 difference in one and 0.02 difference in another, and pretty much on most of the of the districts.
Beyond that, though, the other data as far as like the socioeconomic factors, the diversity factors of different districts and how you're drawing the lines, when do we start looking at that specifically?
Right. Okay. For that, once we move down to the districts or the plans, the generic plans that we're going to select, then I'll run reports on that. That'll give us, you know, what are the socioeconomic makeups like we did before with the neighborhoods. We'll have those same plans or same reports for the districts themselves. I also want to move, again, we're moving from general to detail. I want to do those for the precincts. So ultimately, they may make a decision pertaining to, you know, which precincts we select. And so that's one of the next level of detail that I actually want to move us to. So by the next meeting, my plan was to have the precinct level down so you can actually look at those socioeconomic data down to the precinct level. Recognizing that the lower you move in that, the accuracy of that becomes a little less. So they're just used to sort of gauge in dramatic fashions whether one precinct may be a better match. For example, that South Forest issue, it may reveal the splitting of the two. It may reveal that and warrant the splitting down the middle. But my goal is the next meeting to have those to make that determination as we get down to really detail.
Perfect. Thank you. So, yeah, I think we're pretty much. Oh, we'll take a minute to do those discussion items. Chris.
Yeah, I'll try and be brief. I know we're past time, and it's kind of a good segue what we've been discussing in terms of timelines and some of the series of things that we do. But thinking, stepping back a little bit for big picture, I feel like to some extent it would benefit us as well as we kind of owe it to the public to be sharing a little bit more information specifically around timeline, around, if you'll call it milestones, or what we've accomplished and what's ahead. I think it would be really cool. Like if I've gone out to the districting site, I don't really have any sense of where we're at. And I don't think many people are going to sit there and watch a series of 90-minute videos of these meetings. So I think it would be really helpful to come up with some sort of just snapshot of where we're all at, be it a timeline, be it a sort of a project plan, something like that, and we can brainstorm offline if that's more appropriate for a smaller group. But I just wanted to share that thought.
That's a really good idea, Chris. I think it's something that you, Nicole, and I can discuss, and it's something that we could put forth to the commission just to see, get everyone's feedback and make sure we're putting out something that we're all on the same page about. But I think that's a really, really good suggestion.
Is Kari, did you want to weigh in? I know you were considering some type of a newsletter update. Is that not something that, is this similar to that, I guess is my question, what you kind of wanted to do?
Yeah, this is Kari. I think that it seems like I scribbled a lot of notes at our last meeting, and then we dive into these discussions, and maybe it's twofold, because it is, one is addressing what we've accomplished so far, and then the other piece is what are we going to do. And I think maybe what Chris is also trying to get at is that when we can step back and go, we need to have this plan by October, oh my goodness, how much more do we have to do to get there? So that, I think, maybe the timeline from Tony would be helpful in terms of, okay, so we dive down and we get further along with our discussions about where these lines are going to be drawn, or where we have the expertise because we live in that area. But then when would it make sense to address, have people from Riverside be able to comment about what we're talking about related to splitting their neighborhood? So I think it is somehow it's getting the bigger picture again, or going back to that main timeline that we had started with, but somehow marking through it in a very easy and to understand way, which is why I was thinking more of a newsletter blog kind of writing style of what we've accomplished to date and then what we still have to do. Does that sort of align at least half of what I think I said before and what, Chris, you were trying to get at?
Yeah, I think so. I think both of those are really valuable things. A blog would be helpful for people that want to read that. I think what I'm suggesting is more of a snapshot or executive summary.
Like a graphic or something that kind of gives a overview.
I think
you could kind of look at it and generally not like understand the depth of what we're doing, but kind of understand where we've been, where we're going, and what to expect.
Yeah, I think you hit it, Kari. It's just a matter of where are we going to make it? Where are we at? How much have we done? How much is left? What's going on? For sure.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe that would be something offline then Chris, Simone, Nicole, and I could talk about?
Yeah.
I think that would be great.
Okay.
Awesome. Anyone else have any other discussion items they want to bring up before we adjourn? Going once, going twice. Alrighty, I move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Alrighty, have a good night, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Have a good night.
Take care, all.